everyone, it's Kari and Lauren, Little Miss Funeral over there, and we are back to answer a round of 10 questions. And what makes this round special is they're all from the same viewer. Nathan sent us some questions. He said, I've got some questions for you and Lauren to discuss. First, I'm going to be a pastor in the next few years. And I've heard stories from fellow clergymen about funeral directors who have been really good and do what the pastor wants. And I have heard of some who don't care what the pastor says and does what the family wants or what works best for them. So he is bringing up a really great discussion point because we as funeral directors, I think, say the same thing. We work with some really great pastors and we work with some really not so great clergy people. I guess we shouldn't just use the word pastor. So the first question, what is the standard operating procedure with maybe being caught between clergy and family? Do you have any tips to get funeral directors on your side?
Like if there's a problem between them?
What's the standard operating procedure with maybe being caught between clergy and family? Yeah, I'm not sure. I would read that as maybe, like the first thing that pops in my mind is maybe the person was Catholic and the family's not. And so the pastor didn't know the family because of the parishioner, was the one that attended. So maybe the director is in between the clergy wanting to do it one way and the family wanting to do it another. Let's go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of instances where a family, like let's use Catholic as the example, where the person who passed away was Catholic, but the family is not practicing. So in some situations, they don't know readings, music, things like that to pick out. So there have been instances where a family comes to me and says, I want to do a traditional Catholic funeral because that's what mom would have wanted, but we just don't know what to do. So I've advised them and said, these seem to be popular Catholic readings. These seem to be popular songs that are sung at masses. And I just give my advice like that. But if there ever were any big issues, I always would tell them, well, talk directly to the priest in that situation, because in the grand scheme of things, we are going into his house in that sense. So if he has anything specific, because you do get ones that this is how we're going to do it, this is how we do it, I advise them any large questions, ask directly to him. He's the expert. He'll be able to advise you.
Or her.
Or her.
It's so easy. I think we do work with the majority of male clergy people. So we will probably say him, but we don't want to,
Well, in a Catholic setting, it really is a male,
yes.
But, different Christian denominations and religions, there are females.
Yeah. So I think it is always, I try and cut myself out of being the middle person when it comes to exactly what the family wants the pastor to say, or kind of do, and they meet together and they kind of decide some of that. And then a lot of times what will happen is the pastor will bring us an order of service or will confer with us like, hey, I need these songs, or hey, this is what we're doing, or hey, this is how we want it to operate. And so we don't get involved in the specific of exactly what the pastor's going to say or do, because we don't need to micromanage that part of it. I can see where some directors maybe do, but I think it's each situational. If a family's not getting along with the pastor though and is not happy, then maybe then we need a different pastor, or we need to get in and maybe take over a little more of the service and MC and keep that pastor in the, compartmentalize what they're doing and have them just do their part. And then we take and lay out the rest of it if it's in the funeral home. Like you said, I always say, hey, it's your house. If we're in the church or in, whatever venue, then it's kind of
it's their show.
So there's not much we can do about it. But if the family complains to us, all we can do is try and talk to the pastor and advocate for the family. But there's only so much we can do in some of those situations. Do you have any tips on how to get funeral directors on your side? I think working along with them and not going in acting as if you're not in the same goal. Like your goal is that you are serving the family and you are helping to celebrate the person. And so if your agenda is different from that, then you're not in the right place. This isn't a venue for you to just preach the gospel.
Correct.
It's an avenue for you to provide healing and support through the gospel or through whatever, avenue that you believe. But you're going to be on the same side as the funeral director if you have the same goal. But if you come in just with your own agenda, your own thing you want to do, then it's not going to work. Making sure you're on the funeral director's schedule. I know we've both probably seen that where a family brings the pastor into the arrangement and they've already met with the pastor and the pastor says, well, this is when we are doing things. And it does not coordinate with what is already on the agenda of the funeral home, but the pastor's already announced it. He's already put out the word, or he or she, and they're not working with you. They are just trying to command you into what they want you to do. But as the funeral director, the whole picture of everything that happens is on our plate, whereas only a portion is on the funeral or on the pastor or whoever's plate. And so understanding that it's beyond that 1 hour service and that we are handling the before, during, after everything allows you to maybe understand what's going on a little better and builds a better relationship would be my best recommendation there.
Just that the end game is to do that funeral service for this person who's deceased, like you were saying. And as long as everybody is on that same page, you're going to get along fine. And like you were saying, I've worked with some priests, some pastors, some ministers who think that they are up here and everybody else is down here. So they're running the show. But like you were saying, it's an hour or so of a funeral service where we have the visitation, the calling hours. We have to contact other people, like sometimes help with florists or newspapers, the cemetery or crematory at the very end too. I mean, there's just so much more that goes along into it. So just work together.
I know one thing that we joke about a lot as funeral directors, at least a lot of people I know, is pastors showing up at the arrangements. And this being helpful or not helpful. And I think there's a fine line. So with pastors kind of being there and hijacking the arrangements, I will say, does become a problem. When a pastor is there to gather the information about the person rather than asking the family twice, awesome. Getting the stories that they're sharing during that time. And then maybe when you go type the obituary or you go, do something outside the room, they can then entertain and gather more information from the family. However, if you're trying to accomplish what you need to do as a funeral director and the pastor hijacks and takes over the arrangement and segues it way off the path and you're not able to accomplish what you want to accomplish, it is challenging. Or when you are trying to tell a family, the family asks you a question like, so just as I don't even know, do we need a vault? And the pastor chimes in over you to answer and gives an incorrect answer. And then you have to correct the pastor. The pastor then feels offended. You feel bad because you've had to correct him. He shouldn't be giving, or she shouldn't be giving that input at that moment if they don't know 100%. So there's some situations that can arise where you create distance with the person because they're not in their role where I guess they should be, sort of thing.
Yeah. The arrangement conference, from a funeral director standpoint, we're there to accomplish a couple of different goals. Yes, half of the reason we're doing the arrangement conference is to decide what kind of funeral and what kind of services we want. And there is a certain checklist that we have to go through to make certain we have everything lined up. But another huge aspect of the arrangement conference is to develop a relationship with this family. Maybe you've served them in the past, or maybe you haven't, but the time when I really get to sit down, get to know people, find out about the deceased is at that arrangement conference. And if you do have somebody who is acting as the professional, it can put you in a weird spot because you don't want to be pushy, but you still have this agenda that you have to get through.
Right.
So it's hard. And I hate to say it really is the funeral director's show at that point, but it is, besides for gathering information that we need for legal documentation, and besides for collecting all of the services that you want to do, it's just supposed to be that contact where we can get to know one another. We want you to trust us, and we want to make certain that we know you so we can provide the services that you're comfortable with. So
Right.
It's hard when you have somebody else in there.
Well, and it's a good time for everybody to kind of get on the same page, but it's finding that balance within the arrangement conference where you're all benefiting each other, the situation, you're all benefiting from it, but kind of like we refer to the pastor in their house, they can refer to us in our house too. So it's kind of nice for that mutual respect to be laid out and so forth.
A funeral is going to be a perfect, well-oiled machine if everybody does their job. So
Right.
if we can do our job, and if we can do our job well, by the time we get those families to the funeral, the pastor, the priest, the minister, they're going to be able to do their job really well too. So it's going to help the grieving family throughout that process. But if I'm interjecting, telling the priest and minister, this is how I want you to preach, this is what I want you to touch base, they're not going to like that because that's their level of expertise. And when it comes to funeral directors and ministers, even though we do work hand in hand when it comes to death, and even though they have a very good insight to what we do, they still have no idea what we do. I mean, I know in my area, once again, referring to Catholic priests, you're going to get the Catholic priests where they're like, yeah, I got a call 11 o'clock at night because I had to go do last rites for a person. So they kind of understand being woken up in the middle of the night because they're in that community role. So they get it when they're like, oh yeah, you got a death call at 2 a.m. I get what it's like to be, up at that time too. But at the same time, they're not doing our job. And that's nothing negative. That's nothing against them. You just really cannot understand the role of a funeral director unless you are a funeral director.
Right. But I've had pastors that we greet each other with a hug. They're just some of my favorite people. Yeah. But I also had a pastor who referred to me as the twit, to everybody, because anyway.
I've had pastors refuse to drive with me because I'm a woman. Baptist pastors, because if I drive a priest or a pastor from the church to the cemetery, that's something very common that I do. And like you were saying, I have some that I love, and we have great conversations and we joke and we laugh. But then I have those other ones where I know when I'm going to a church, if I'm the funeral director on that service, they're not driving with me. They're going into the hearse with the male driver there because they refuse to drive with me. And I respect it because it's, maybe their
religion. Yeah.
And I'm not getting mad about it, but it's hard because I've had even instances where I've gone to talk to certain pastors about what needs to get done so I know what they want me to do. And I've had some who everybody who follows me knows Keith. I talk about him. He's my right-hand man. So Keith and I can be standing next to each other. I can be talking to the pastor and he won't answer me. He'll answer and look at Keith. And I'm just like, and it is what it is.
One more thing on the pastor front that I want to say or the clergy front, is honorariums. So I feel that pastors sometimes use us and play us to collect their money because they're kind of chicken butts about saying, I am doing a job and you need to pay me for it. And this happens a lot, where you talk to a family and during arrangements about prices of everything, and you do cash advances, or you give them envelopes to write out checks for participants. Oh no, our pastor would never want anything. Okay, fine. So, but then immediately after the service or a week later, the pastor will be like, I never got paid for that. I said, well, your family from your church said that you would not want any money. Well, that I want $300. So can you please call the family and get it from them? And they want you to then go back rather than him call the family and say, I provided a service, I want to be paid. Or upfront saying, this is the fees of our church or of our participants or of me. They expect us to collect that for them. I'm not saying every time, but I have gotten into more situations and families arguing with me because they'll be like, we've attended the church for 50 years. We shouldn't pay for anything. But
we've made donations. We've done this. We've done that. Yeah.
But the church has given me a price list that says, I want 300 for the pastor. I want 100 for the organist. I want 50 for the sound person. I want this, this, and this. And we tell the family and they're like, we're not paying it because and it's like, what do you want me to do? And so you tell the church and you get into this middle ground, especially if you're going to a church for the service and it's in their house. Like when the family goes there to meet with them, have the discussion with them about what the fees are, or just give them a little price list that your church has come up with. These are our fees for using using the church. Have a maybe member and a non-member fee, because some churches do get non-members because of the size of the church. They use it to facilitate for the size of the funeral. But even within the funeral home, where pastors are, if they're in their arrangement and they're sitting there and you're talking about stuff, and then they look at the pastor and the pastor's like, oh, no. And then they come to you afterwards and say, where's my check? And it's like, how do you want me to charge a family for something you said no to? And it happens often. And so, either a funeral director just has to put a flat fee on there and say, this is the flat fee, and we give it to every pastor. We want to make sure they're taken care of. Or the pastors need to start ponying up and saying, these are our fees, and the church needs to present the price list and stuff. But do you run into that, or am I just crazy?
No, it definitely happens. And I feel like this is straight across the board for anybody involved in funeral service, any aspect of funeral service, because when somebody experiences a loss, it's hard to be like, sorry, mom dies, you owe me money.
Right.
Nobody wants to have that talk. My least favorite part of the arrangement conference is when I have to go through the general price list, the itemization, and be like, this is what you owe me by this date, because I hate it. I want to help you. But at the same time, I get a paycheck for the job that I do. I have a kid. I have to pay my mortgage. I have to pay my student loans. Like we all have to, right? So I think that from my point of view, it's easier to be upfront with people, so when they first come in and you give them the general price list and you kind of say, we're going to be talking about all of this stuff, it's not an easy conversation, but at the end of that meeting, at least they know what they're going to owe. Where I think that these priests and ministers should take that road as well when they're sitting down and meeting with families to go over readings, music, whatever, to be like, listen, this is our fee. We have a church. We have to keep the lights on. We have to heat the place. I have to pay the organist. It's all understandable, but you have to be open and upfront about it. And people aren't going to be upset in those situations. And if they are, what's the worst thing that you're going to do? We don't want to go to that church, and we're going to call this church, and that church will have a fee too. And then these people will realize that it's straight across the board. But no, it definitely happens. It's the same thing. They all and I have priests or ministers too that get mad at me when I hand them their check, in front of people. They're like, no. Like they don't want to see that they're getting paid, but they want their money. So there are some ministers or priests where I'll have to silently slip them the check to be like, here you go.
You gotta do the handshake money
yes.
thing. Hey.
Yeah, because they don't want to be seen that they're getting paid. And it's like, you're providing a service. So.
And they put a lot of time into some of these messages and homilies and everything. 5-6 hours worth of work writing the message.
I've done funeral services myself where, you know, at the end of meeting with a family, I go into the office and like you were saying, I sit down for hours sometimes going through readings, going through poems, going through scriptures of finding something that I think this family can find value in. It's not like, and some ministers do have like, this is what they say for every single person that comes into their church. But then you get a lot of them that they want to help the healing process. So they really do work to make certain that the words that they're saying are going to be healing for everybody involved. There's a
and
lot
that time is worth money. And
yes.
also, do you find that morticians and clergy are more likely to be friends since their jobs are fairly similar?
Not necessarily. There's a professional relationship there.
Well, and you have something in common, but
I don't go out to drink with like my clergy friends.
Why not?
I just don't. Well, I do a very large Catholic, we have a very large Catholic clientele. So like, it's just a little bit weird if you're going to the bar with a priest. Like,
Father Steve, what's up? Yeah.
In my opinion. Not saying that they're not people too, because they are. And I'm very friendly with a lot of the priests and ministers. I mean, I text one priest within our community all the time because he's just somebody that I've connected with. And being a Christian, like if I have questions about my faith or something, I feel comfortable. So we text each other and I'll be like, hi, Father, what about this? And he'll text me back. Like it's really funny and I really love him and everything like that. But typically I'm friendly with people, but I'm not like friends with them.
Yeah, so. I don't know that there's any pastors I like hang out with, but I have some that I am close to that I've had a long history of, interaction with, or there's 2 pastors that come to mind in different communities I've served, and they always seem to get the crap calls. And I mean, just like the most tragic, ridiculous, did that really happen to a family situations over and over and over again. And so we have developed a closer relationship than I would with most pastors because we have just been in the trench with some families, and those situations, it's a very different, interaction and connection because of what you've gone through. I think camaraderie together. How do your religious beliefs shape your work life?
I'm a Christian. And I was raised Roman Catholic, and I fully believe that my beliefs have helped because working in death and dying, seeing what you see day in and day out, I fully believe that this life is only part, that there is an eternal life. And for me, that's very comforting to know, because when you see some of this crap that happens, and like I'm not that person that believes everything happens for a reason. I just believe sometimes stuff happens and it sucks and there's no explanation for it.
Right.
So for me, having the comfort of knowing that I have a loving God who's looking out for me, and knowing that there is a life after this, it's comforting for me. And I fully believe that it helps me do my job, because otherwise I think I would just have this depressing career that, why does this happen? It doesn't make sense. And that's how I get through it.
And I'm a Christian, was raised Methodist, and I just had this conversation with a woman the other day from YouTube. We were messaging back and forth about her losing her son and her faith. And I said, I don't know how people without faith in something or a belief in something can get through some of the losses that happen in people's lives. I definitely question my faith more because of what I see. I think, when you see evil and you see some of the things that just seem so unfair that happen to people and families and in situations, and you wonder how. And maybe I question God, maybe I question my faith, maybe I question whatever, but it makes me dig deeper and, lean on my faith. And so I whether it's good or bad, I don't know. Some days I feel like, man, I'm a bad Christian for questioning this, or man, I'm whatever. But I think at the end of the day, we all go through those things, whether we're in funeral service or not. You always are going to question kind of what happens. But I know a good prayer some days makes me feel a lot better when I'm on my way home from a pretty craptastic funeral situation. When a couple is interred in a couch configuration in a mausoleum, how do they unseal the crypt to allow for the second person to be interred? Well, the crypt is not sealed. Typically, they'll put the placard or, the front.
Do you have two of them? Do you have like the plaque and then the outside, like with your mausoleums?
Yeah, so there's like the plate that they just screw on, and then you put up the wood or the marble or the whatever granite on the outside. So when it's a first interment, they put the person in and they just put those up. The second interment, they seal it with caulk and seal and duct tape or whatever they use. Every cemetery is a little different. I've seen a couple different variations on that.
See, where I am, they use caulk every single time, even if it's just one person in there.
And so do they break the caulk out?
They break it. So because you never know when someone else is going to die. So they could die 40, 50 years after. So with that first like plate that you put in, they'll caulk that all the way around. And then when the second person passes away, they break that to re-put them in. And then like you were saying, the outer exterior granite typically is held together with like some screws. It's not the best outer exterior, because it's just a couple screws that are put there. So I think that's why my area, they caulk it every single time just for that added reinforcement.
Well, maybe there's two different, I'll have to look into, maybe they do two different type of caulks, like one that's like a little gasket that you can remove, and maybe one is more permanent. So we'll have to look into maybe generalized what they do for that. So great question though. Have you ever brought your torchierre lamps to a building for a viewing because the lighting is so bad? Yes.
I've transported them.
I know some funeral homes that carry theirs to every church for setup because they want to control the lighting and they want to control how the person looks. Seems like a lot of work to carry all that stuff out every time.
Well, ours are kind of like old school, like vintage almost, so they're heavy. So we only carry ours like if we know we're going someplace where we're going to be doing a setup. Otherwise we don't carry them with us at all times.
And then they can break because they are glass tops, and a lot of it, you get some of the old school ones and
they're hard to find.
Glass, they almost look like Tiffany lamps, like they are really ornate, and you break that. And
one of ours broke like 3 years ago, and we had a hell of a time trying to find the replacement for it because it's just so old that these new companies don't make them.
No,
we
nobody
finding them and bought like 6 of them, like just
what are some horror stories you have seen or heard about in your line of work? It's a pretty broad question for
like clergy members.
I don't know. What are some horror stories you've seen or heard about in your line of work?
I have like a funny, scary story that happened when I was leaving a church one time. As people who are probably aware, I'm in the Western New York area. I do a lot of funerals in the city of Buffalo, and there are some very good parts of Buffalo, and there are some very not so good parts of Buffalo. And some of our old, beautiful churches just happen to be in not so good parts of the city. So people will still go there to have their funeral arrangements because they're like cathedrals, gorgeous places. We were exiting a church one time, and as the pallbearers were placing the casket into the hearse, gunshots went off, and it sounded like it was right by us. And they put never saw people put a casket in a hearse quicker. Everybody ran to their cars, locked it. Here I am walking up and down the street, flashers and headlights, flashers. Yeah, do everything. Looking around me, where the heck? Because it honestly sounded like the next street over. We get in our cars then to ride in procession to go to the cemetery. We pass by the shooting site because they had the ambulances and everything going off on the one main road. So as I'm passing the hearse, that's what happened, guys. So that was something that was a horror story that happened on a funeral that thankfully did not affect the families that we served. Looking back, it's hilarious and we can laugh about it. And I actually had this family come back to our funeral home couple of years after that had happened, and they lost another family member. They're like, oh, we want to go back to this church. And I was like, I have a funny story about that church. And they were like, that was our family. So,
Oh my gosh. That's so funny that the first story that once you started talking, a story popped in my head, and then you said gunshots, and mine was also kind of that pertaining. So we had a family, a young girl died. Her parents were not married, and there was a lot of threats between the mom's family and the dad, because there was a lot of talk that maybe the dad caused the daughter's death, which in the end there was no foul play at all. And it was in a Hispanic community, a lot of gangs and things that were in that community, and I happened to be filling in for this funeral, and it was not my standard community, so I didn't realize, I think, the danger that was really there. And so they're like, you should probably let the police know you're going to be there. And I'm like, okay. So I did. So they sent some undercover officers to attend the funeral just in case. And during the visitation time, we're out in the narthex of this church, and you could look and there's chairs lined up all around. And for 1 hour, there's the mother's family on one side, and there's the father's family on the other side. And the dad gets up and heads to the restroom with one of the other little kids. And you see like 4 guys get up from the mom's side and head to the restroom. And I'm like, oh crap, it's about to go down. Like, there's like, all I could think was, they're gonna kill him in the bathroom, and this poor little kid's gonna see it. And oh my God, I like did not breathe, I don't think, for, the whole time they were in. And as soon as the dad came out of the restroom with the little kid, I was like, oh, thank God. Like, I was so nervous for what could happen in that moment, and it luckily didn't. But that's funny you said gunshots, because I was like, oh, I'm so thankful I didn't have gunshots at mine. I also broke a little thing from a font inside the Catholic Church that day. I felt really bad. I like knocked into the table. It fell off, it shattered. I was like, oh, that can't be good. Oh, 6. Why do people always seem to mess up the necks of the deceased? Like, seriously, it happens all the time. It's such an obvious mistake. Why can't people fix it? I had a lady ask me actually yesterday in a video comment, that my mom's head was so far up and she had like 6 necks, and I asked them to fix it and they wouldn't. So a lot of people, you don't realize, carry weight here. And when somebody lays down, all of what would be hanging kind of here sets. So a lot of times a neck will appear a lot heavier because of gravity and the weight that settles in. Because if you have jowls and you have a lot that kind of under this area, it's going to rest back into that neck. So not that people don't mess it up sometimes, but there's not a lot we can do with the extra that's there or the heaviness. I told the lady, though, that they could have, maybe if she was up too far this way, they could have flattened her out by maybe putting something under her back right here, and it lifts this part up and it flattens the person out, and some of this does flatten out. But without seeing the person, I can't say whether they could have or not, but that's my quick fix if I know I need to get a little bit of relief in that area. I don't know.
When it comes to laying people out, I mean, the honest truth about it is you have funeral directors who are really good at it, and you have funeral directors who are really bad at it. And sometimes the really bad funeral directors don't even realize that they're bad at it. It's just like putting mom and dad in the casket, and this is what they look like, where it really is the attention to detail and that eye that you're looking for. For instance, when I lay a person in the casket, the lip of the casket, I always want the person's shoulder to be right there. So I put my hand flat to make certain that their shoulder is like even with the casket, because you don't want mom to be so high up, because the bed is adjustable, that it looks like she's going to fall out, and you don't want mom so down low that you have to like peer in to look at her. I've used phone books, I've used flag boxes, I've used balled up newspapers, anything and everything to place underneath, like you were saying, the shoulders, like the back shoulders, because by just doing a little bit, it just pushes things up ever so slightly. And I put balls like of newspaper underneath their heads too to lift it up, because it's just an art form when it comes down to having somebody lay. But in the grand scheme of things too, depending on the embalming process, their body, their weight, if mom is a heavier person, there's just nothing, like you were saying, that you can do about that. So there are little tips and tricks that we can do to somewhat like skew things to make it appear nicer. But if a person's embalmed, and if they were embalmed with a high index where they're not moving, you can put whatever you want underneath them, but their body is just going to be stiff, where maybe there's just nothing you can do in
there's no play. There's no mobility within the extremities to do anything. I think you just brought up a good point, which I know you saying it is going to give questions. So let's talk about it for 1 second, is using newspaper, using different things like that, because someone's going to say, why are you putting garbage in with somebody? So in order to position bodies, we use styrofoam blocks, we use, towels and paper towel and all sorts of different things of varying sizes. We don't go digging through a garbage can, but newspaper is a form of paper that comes large. We can make it smaller, larger, for positioning, and it works super well. How hard is it to break the seal on a vault? Do they?
I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Do they really work? Yeah, crowbars. Some you really have to demolish the vault. It depends on how much moisture I think the vault has been exposed to. Has it been sitting in water? Has it been, in Michigan, we go hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. It affects a vault just like it affects the roads and everything else. So, well, like in Buffalo too,
we're the same.
That swing in the weather, that it affects what's going on below ground too. So, but I've
only ever done 2 disinterments. And in the first case, the vault was not a sealer vault. It was just a grave liner, because that's all. There's no law that says you need to purchase a vault. These are like cemetery requirements.
Right.
So a cemetery requirement, if they are requiring that, typically it's grave liner. Grave liners don't seal. So a lot of families will purchase that because that's why they have to do that. So the first disinterment that I saw was a grave liner, and it was a mess because water and everything got inside. And then the second one was a vault that had a gasket around it, and it was in perfect condition. I mean, you don't know, and typically you're burying these things into the ground, and an average person isn't going to do a disinterment, so you just hope and pray that everything stays intact.
Yeah, so it depends on, I think, kind of like how decomposed is mom that died 3 years ago in the ground. How good is the seal on the vault? Until you open the ground and look, you don't for sure know. But my experience with the sealed vault is it takes some work to get them open, if you want to get them open. If you're a Roman Catholic, do you take mass at funeral masses?
I do not.
Okay.
I know a lot of funeral directors do. I know a lot of funeral directors like to be seen during a mass or a funeral service. So they'll sit, I know some who sit in the front row. I know others who just sit in the back and whatnot. I don't, because I believe that portion of the funeral, if we are going into a church or a temple or something other than the funeral home, that is not my place. So I do what I have to do to get a casket in, and then I go and I hide. Because I don't need to make myself known during those. That's family time. That's remembering the deceased. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I just don't.
Yeah, I've seen the same with funeral directors that I've worked alongside that are Catholic. Some will and some will not. It just depends. I think on the moment, if they're in there, then they may do it. If they're not in there, it's not like they're going to run to go join the communion. I think the same, someone broached a question before, do you pray with a family if you're in the chapel? Or do you, stand in the back with your eyes open kind of thing? And my response was, it depends what I'm doing. If I am like standing with the family around a graveside or I'm in the sanctuary, I will pray. If I'm out in the back and I'm kind of getting the team lined up and stuff, I'm not going to stop everything to pray. So it depends on if I'm in the moment with everyone or if I'm, if I'm being seen or if I'm not being seen, sort of thing. And if I'm in it with them or if I'm not in it with them. So it just depends on where I'm at the moment of the prayer. And I think communion is sort of the same with a lot of people too. If you're in there and in it, then you take it. Is there anything you won't do for the family? I'm not going to sacrifice some animals.
I know.
There is not much. I tell families, like, I am here to help you. If you want me to stand in the corner on my head, I will do it. If you want me to, like, I'm there and I'm kind of at their disposal to help them and to make it what the experience they want it to be. Of course I'm not, there's certain things I'm not going to do, but I think it's just a character and moral compass sort of answer that I'm not going to do. But
I think most funeral directors kind of view that as you've gotten into this field to help people. So whatever you can do to help them, you will, within reason. Like,
right.
Let's be honest for a second. If people need me to advise them on what floors to use, what breakfast place to use, what readings to use, like, I will give them my opinions on things. Absolutely. There's a lot that I won't do for families though, because we do get a lot of people who have questions about what happens after the fact. And what I mean by that is they'll come to me and be like, let's say the funeral bill is all paid for now. And then they come to me and they're like, well, mom has life insurance and, we don't know what to do in that situation. Like, I'll tell them, well, this is the number, you'll call them, they'll advise you what to do if they're not using that to pay for the funeral. Because in the past, I have helped out people with certain things, and then I feel like they've kind of fallen back on me. Like, weeks after the burial, they're calling me asking about retirement things and settling estates, and I'm not knowledgeable in those areas. I'm not a lawyer, so there's a lot of things where I want to help people, but sometimes I feel like they find comfort with me, so they want me to walk through like settling all of mom's estate, where I can't do that.
Yeah. That's a good point. At some points we have to refer people to a professional in the realm of where they're seeking professional, kind of like the counseling thing I know we've talked about before. Sometimes it's just we cannot handle the emotional questions and kind of outpouring that they want us to take on, but they're comfortable with us, so they want to like kind of spill out to us. But at some point we kind of refer people to maybe a counselor or a therapy group or something, because it's beyond what we should be taking on. Really love your video. Could you talk about how you would arrange a presidential funeral? We've talked about, I think, the presidential funeral before. Yeah. This tells you how long these questions have been saying here. We've had a lot of questions to answer. You don't do much arranging a presidential funeral. It is dictated to you how it is all going to happen. So I would not be doing much. I would just be getting the body ready and delivering them in their casket to where they needed to go with the proper escort. So thanks guys for joining us with questions. Make sure you post more questions below and we will see you soon. Bye.